Good afternoon. I want to take this opportunity to welcome you to Los Angeles, our 2022 annual meeting. I look forward to reconnecting with as many colleagues as possible in the coming days and to engage in discussions on research findings and how we move human genetics forward globally. I want to thank all of you for having absolute confidence in me to be your president for this year. Thank you. Performing my responsibility as the president was made infinitely easier by the dedication and professionalism of ASHG staff and my colleagues on the board of directors and on the various committees who volunteer to serve our society. My sincere gratitude to all of you. Before I go into my presidential address, I want to say that I am here in my personal capacity. It's important for me to say that in terms of my official responsibility as the scientific director of the National Institute of National Human Genome Research Institute. So whatever I'm saying, my comments today is indeed in my personal capacity as the president of ASHG. I'd like to draw your attention to two upcoming events. One of them is my presidential symposium. We are going to discuss all of the exciting genomic activities going on across Africa. We are going to engage in very exciting dialogue about where genomics is now in Africa and what it is becoming. I'm co-moderating this section with Dr. Francis Collins, and we have 4 able scientists from Africa who are going to be joining us for this symposium. Christian Happy, Julie McCanney, Mayowa Wolabi, and Nicola Moder. I hope to see you there. The second announcement is to invite you to come home as part of the International Congress of Human Genetics that is taking place February 22nd to 26th, 2023 in beautiful Cape Town, South Africa. The theme of the conference is Coming Home, which acknowledges our common origin in a geographical region called Africa today. I do sincerely hope that you will join us in person because it is difficult, if not impossible, to come home virtually. I'll begin my address with acknowledgement of the wonderful progress that the global scientific community is making towards fulfilling the promise of how understanding the information coded in human genomes will revolutionize our appreciation of who we are, where our genetic ancestors come from, and why differential susceptibility or resistance to disease in different environmental contexts. The developing understanding of the evolutionary history and function of the about 4% of the modern human genome that came from interbreeding with archaic humans, including Neanderthal and Denisovans, is a clear demonstration of the power of genomics. I'd like to use this opportunity to congratulate our colleague, Sante Pabu, who was awarded this year Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for his discoveries concerning the genomes of extinct hominids and human evolution. I'd like for us to take a moment and just congratulate him for this wonderful achievement. Collectively, progress in human genetics and related fields are moving us closer to the full integration of genomic understanding of biology into the day-to-day practice of medicine and the development of new therapeutics for previously intractable diseases, including several types of cancers and gene editing to cure sickle cell. However, genomic-driven scientific and medical innovations are currently not shared equitably by all human populations, with the resulting well-documented global challenge of lack of diversity, both in the participants and in the scientists that are engaged in genomic science. As has been acknowledged by me and others, if not urgently and systematically addressed, these challenges will likely compromise our goal and our vision that people everywhere realize the benefit of human genetics and genomic research. While more work is needed, I'm encouraged by efforts underway in Africa, the Middle East, Asia, North and South America, and the call to action by several organizations, including WHO, the National Human Genome Research Institute at NIH, the International Common Disease Alliance, and the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, and our own society. ASHG is contributing to achieving the promise of genomics in a variety of ways. One, serving the research community by providing a forum where scientists present and share transformative approaches and technologies in human genetics and medicine. Two, providing opportunities for trainees and scientists from diverse backgrounds to attend annual meetings. And three, increasing diversity of its board of directors, as illustrated by the change in the number of board members who self-identifying as non-European ancestry has risen from 5% as recent as 2017 to 40% today. And I'm extremely proud of that achievement of our society. Four, acknowledging past harms in human genetics, such as eugenics and reinforcement of racial stereotypes. Five, highlighting the evolving use of ancestry, ethnicity, and race in human genetics in the Society's journal. And six, proudly supporting ASHG members who are helping to lead and shape the work of the National Academy's Committee to assess the existing methodologies, benefits, and challenges in the use of race, ethnicity, and other population descriptors in genomic research. What I would like to talk about in the remaining few minutes of my presidential address is the question that I'm often asked when I give talks. Why is it important to have diversity in research participants? This question is usually asked after I make the statement that human genomes are greater than 99% similar, irrespective of where the DNA samples come from globally. Of course, the moment I invoke the non-random distribution of the less than 1% of human genetic variation that differ by geography and between individuals and groups, I'm also queried about another statement that I and others make, and that is, genomic data do not support the existence of distinct human racial groups, and race is not an objective genomic classifier. So how do we begin to unpack these statements that seem orthogonal to each other so we can advance our science and allow all of us to simultaneously appreciate our individuality and our common humanity? I would like to challenge us to ask ourselves why we continue to tolerate the use of imprecise labels that we know are hindering our understanding and interpretation of how genetics and non-genetic factors influence human health and identity. I ask these questions because geneticists, epidemiologists, anthropologists, and clinicians that I interact with acknowledges that descriptors such as Black, white, Hispanic, Asian are at best imprecise proxies to the causal factors that underlie health inequities globally. However, some scientists are reluctant to eliminate these racial labels for different reasons, including how they were trained and the observation that these labels capture some information that is important to scientific and clinical practice. My response is usually yes, that there is some correlation between labels like Black or Hispanic with some health indicators. But this is because such labels are mega variables that capture several risk factors at once. What we need to understand is the factors that these mega variables are capturing. Factors like income, education, and living in economically neglected neighborhoods. I will mention two recent examples to help us walk through this discussion. First, the clean water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and Jackson, Mississippi. For our international colleagues, you may not be very familiar with this, but there was major crisis where individuals in this community did not have access to clean water. Most individuals affected by this crisis are Black, but this correlation is not necessarily helpful for solving the problem because Blacks that live in rich neighborhoods were not affected, and whites who live in poor neighborhoods were affected. So in this particular example, living in a certain neighborhood is more important than whether you are Black or white. However, it would be negligent not to acknowledge why these neighborhoods became predominantly Black and neglected. In the case of Jackson, Mississippi, it is clearly the combined effect of racism and political ideology. Residents of Jackson are mostly Democratic in the terms of the Democratic Party, while the state's leadership, including the governor, is mostly Republican. The second example is the well-established causal relationship between the APOL1 and kidney disease. The prevalence of APOL1 renal risk variant is more common in individuals from geographical regions of sub-Saharan Africa affected by the trypanosomiasis, the so-called African sleeping sickness, because these variants confer evolutionary advantage against this disease. Now, it is important to note that it is not a defining characteristic of being African or Black, and that because of admixture and gene flow, these risk variants have spread around the world, such that using labels like African or Black seriously distort our understanding of individuals at risk of kidney disease due to these variants. This misunderstanding can lead to misdiagnosis with potentially deadly consequences among persons who look phenotypically European or Hispanic. To move forward, I suggest that we must appreciate the pre-genetic history of human racial classification from as far back as the 15th century. It is important to note that throughout this long history, there has never been agreement regarding the number of races, nor their defining characteristics. Taxonomically, Francois Bernier, in his 1684 work titled A New Division of the Earth by the Different Species or Races Which Inhabit It, divided humans into 4 geographical races, one covering Europe, North Africa, Western Asia, and part of Southern Asia. excuse me, one covering the rest of Africa, one covering the rest of Asia, including Central, East, and North Asia, and one including only the lapse. He was uncertain if Native Americans constitute a fifth race, but was inclined to include them with Europeans. Although Benier's primary consideration was geographical, he described generalization of physical characteristics, including skin color and facial features. Today, the world still has no clear definition of race, and racial classifications continues to be fluid. For example, race in America, in the United States of America, is now based on self-identification, with individuals allowed to report more than one race group, with the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, OMB, requiring a minimum of 5 categories, which are white, black, or African American, American Indian, Alaskan Native, Asian, and Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islanders. Importantly, OMB clearly states that racial categories included in the census questionnaire for the United States generally reflect a social definition of race recognized in this country and not an attempt to define race biologically, anthropologically, or genetically. In addition, it recognizes that these categories of race include racial and national origin or socio-cultural groups. People may choose to report more than one race to indicate their racial admixture, such as American Indian and white. People who identify their origin as Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish may be of any race. Now, think about that for a minute. If these centuries of inconsistencies in the meaning of racial categories do not challenge our professional and personal conscience about the use of race in research, I am at a loss as to what will do it for us. At the minimum, we must try to adopt the kind of labeling that we used during the development of the International Haplotype Mapping Project. These were descriptors such as Yoruba from Ibadan, Nigeria, instead of black or African. Utah residents from Northern and Western European ancestry instead of whites or Caucasians. And Han Chinese individuals from Beijing, China, instead of Asians or East Asians. These are the minimum I think we can do, and if we think more about it, we could actually do better. To help us move forward, the use of pre-genetically defined racial categories in research and clinical practice, it is important to acknowledge that the level of genetic variation that geneticists see across human population does not rise to the level of subspeciation. This is obvious because within anatomically modern humans, there is no biological evidence for any reproductive barriers such as anatomical or physiological incompatibilities. However, the small, less than 1% differences in genetic variation between individuals and populations are not random and may be important in understanding our ancestry, risk of developing certain diseases, and response to therapeutics. For example, population geneticists can use this non-random genetic variation to define complex patterns of genetic admixture and ancestry across human populations. A recent study that investigated genetic ancestry in a sample of about 6,000 individuals from 30 primary language families from around the world identified 21 genetic ancestries, with over half of these ancestries identified among present-day Africans, emphasizing the huge genetic diversity across Africa. Notably, individuals in this global dataset had on average DNA from 4 ancestries. The majority, 97.3%, display mixed ancestry and multiple ancestries mapped to each continent. It is essential to point out that because genetic ancestry is determined solely by genomic data, it is not subjectively self-identified and is subject to evolutionary changes. This means that ancestry, in the long run, are subject to birth and death cycles, and ancestry-specific allele frequencies can change over time. Also, the number of ancestral groups can change as the diversity of genomic reference database improve. In all, this study showed that ancestry cross-classifies ethno-linguistic groups as well as continent and racial categories. For example, Western Asian ancestry with highest frequency in peoples from the Caucasus Mountains and the Levant is the major ancestry in Georgian and Druze samples and is present in samples ranging from Morocco to Mongolia and from England to Ethiopia. That is, Western Asian ancestry simultaneously exists in Africa, Asia, and Europe, as well as in the United States racial categories, Black, African American, Asian, and white. In contrast to racial categories, genetic ancestry is a valid genomic classifier. Ancestral backgrounds have significant implications for disease prevalence and severity and variable response to therapeutics. Like I said earlier, examples include, we're very familiar with this, Tay-Sachs disease among persons of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, hemoglobinopathies in people with African or Middle Eastern ancestry, and the APOL1-associated kidney disease that I mentioned earlier. However, because genetic background that underline these biological observations may present in other ancestries, e.g., Tay-Sachs disease is seen in non-Jewish populations. Hemoglobinopathy are seen in non-African populations. Racial or ethnic labeling of these health outcomes can render them invisible in some ancestral groups, leading to many years of misdiagnosis, incorrect public health screening decisions, and pain and suffering. Illustratively, the frequency of the HLA variant that helps to understand whether treating with abacavir for HIV treatment, whether it will lead to hypersensitivity, varies from 0 to 20% globally. Among individuals who may be labeled as Black or African, frequency varies from approximately 14% among the Maasai from Kenya and about 1% among African Americans, and it is 0% among Yoruba from Nigeria. Thus, the use of these and similar social labels, white, Asians, and Hispanic, can render them, these very important biological variables, invisible in terms of public health decisions and diagnosis. The use of racial categories in public health and socio-political policy making in countries like the United States is where I see perhaps the biggest challenge is moving beyond racial classifications or categories in science. I say this because despite its flaws, some scientists and policymakers are concerned that eliminating them will make it difficult to collect necessary data to address racism in societies. My suggestion, perhaps naive, is to keep and use them as social labels without calling them racial labels. Racial categories. They are just social labels that can help us understand cultural issues. For example, when we say African American in the United States, we are referring to a cultural group with complex pattern of admixture and ancestry. It is not a genetically defined distinct group. Personally, and in my research, the only way I can consistently define African Americans are those who are the descendants of the Middle Passage, who live in the United States. Also, while I commend all persons that are working hard to root out racism in every society where it exists, I'm beginning to accept that racism is a societal infection that cannot be cured scientifically or medically. Therefore, I believe the slow progress in eliminating racism is not because of lack of data or evidence. It is because of the source of the social problem of racism lies with the racist and not in the intrinsic biology of their victims, as stated in the 2004 Nature Genetic editorial entitled The Unexamined Population. Hence, eliminating racism and dismantling the socio-political structure that gives it oxygen requires the awakening of the consciousness of humanity to the devastating health, economic, and safety consequences of the practice of racism. We have all felt the impact of recent examples, such as the public murder of George Floyd by a white police officer in Minneapolis, the shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery while jogging in the streets of Brunswick, Georgia, by a white father and a son, and the labeling of devastating coronavirus using disparaging terms because of its origin in China, leading to backlash among those of East Asian ancestry. Racism needs to be investigated and fully prosecuted. Given the unique role of our society in human genetics, we must use a single unapologetic voice to confront the lingering eugenics thinking, racism, and systemic inequalities and their devastating consequences on humanity. I would like to end by calling on ASHG board and membership to continue to take important steps to document and untie itself from the inequalities that have been part of the society's past. If we are indeed committed to the goal of building an equitable future of genomic research and medicine, our society, SHG, and funding agencies need to pay attention to ongoing global genomic efforts in low to medium income countries, so we can continue to expand on the success stories of programs like H3 Africa, Genome Asia 100,000. Scientists in high-income countries, including the US and Europe, must elevate their collaborative strategies to be more fair and supportive of the development of research capacity with the full appreciation for the challenges faced by their colleagues in resource-challenged environments. I would like to reinforce some key points. Genetic differences between individuals and by geography are important in understanding human migration history and ancestral background and may have biological meaning that can help us to fully realize the promise of genomic medicine. While self-identification is the current desired approach in genomics and medicine, it is important to note that most individuals have mixed ancestry, and that mixed ancestry may not be fully recognized or appreciated by the individual. And this mixed ancestry is key to our ability to fully deploy individualized care. Analysis of data from global sequencing of hundreds of thousands of human genomes has now made it abundantly clear that we only have one human race, but billions of genomes. The individual is the ultimate variant, and collectively, human genetic variation is a continuum, and the genetic differences among human populations are overwhelmingly the result of gradation in allele frequencies and not uniqueness. Hence, the editorial board of Nature Biotechnology in 2014 likened the attempt to use genetics to define distinct racial categories as trying to slice soup. You can cut all you want, that soup stays mixed. That is us. We are all complex mixtures of ancestries, and we need to appreciate that. I thank you again for giving me the opportunity to serve as this year's president of this great society. I wish you the very best in life, and please help to spread the word about our common humanity. We need it now more than ever. Please be safe and enjoy the conference and what the city of Los Angeles has to offer. Thank you.